In your opinion, why do you feel that this film is important, and what impact do you hope that it will leave with people?
Well, I mean, interviewing autistic people and making the chances of that communication more successful is important to me. My name's Phil Morris. I'm a retired police officer. For the latter part of my time in the police, I used to teach police officers on interviewing skills, and in particular interviewing vulnerable people. And I continue to teach police officers around the country on interviewing skills, particularly in relation to victims and witnesses who may be autistic or may be learning disabled. I think some people believe that autistic people are unable to communicate in general. That certainly isn't the case. Of course, some autistic people may struggle, they may even be non-verbal, but many autistic people communicate very well indeed. And sometimes it's just a case of adapting some measures to the professional's own communication style, which will enable a communication to be very productive. A lot of autistic people have excellent vocabularies and speak very well indeed and are very eloquent. And it's really up to the professional just to adapt his or her style to make that conversation go a lot more smoothly. Some of the things you may experience when talking to an autistic person is a lack of eye contact. It may just be the case that eye contact is something which is uncomfortable for that person, and it certainly doesn't necessitate that someone's being untruthful or they may have something to hide. It can be too much eye contact as well. Echolalia is another condition that sometimes autistic people experience, whereby they repeat back what's been said to them. It doesn't mean that they're being disrespectful or anything like that. It's just this condition which we know as is termed echolalia. And autistic people don't tend to be good at initiating conversation. The emphasis is on the professional to start that with a purposeful question rather than, "Are you okay?" And just try and give a purposeful question which is specific rather than too open, and that hopefully will get the communication flow. The use of language is really important when communicating with an autistic person. Keep it simple, keep it to the point. Things such as inferences, sarcasm, irony are not always ways of communicating that autistic people use. They don't tend to use that type of thing, and consequently, it's not something that resonates with them. So inferences where you put a particular emphasis on a word to try and make a point in particular, that's not always picked up upon. We have a tendency to use jargon. We have a tendency to perhaps ask too much or use too many words. Some time may be required for the individual that's been spoken to actually review what's been said to them. Hopefully then you will see some response. So if at all possible, try and avoid those inferences because they might not be received. They might not pick up on those particular signals that you're expressing in your communication styles. We express ourselves with our hands, and that doesn't always tend to be the case with autistic people. The continued use of somebody's name is helpful when engaging a conversation or interviewing an autistic person. Questions need to be appropriately constructed. Avoid leading questions. We all have a tendency in our normal vernacular, in our normal conversation styles, to perhaps use questions such as "did." When you do that, you are inexorably going to ask a question where you're going to suggest the answer. And therefore, it's a suppositional leading question. It's going to be a leading question if you start that question with "did." And to start an interview with "tell me all about," an open question, might not be an appropriate question for an autistic person to receive. It's a very wide open question. And sometimes that can be quite challenging for an autistic person to perceive what it is that is actually requested from them. Use who, what, where, when, how, those types of questions at the start, and avoid "can you" and "would you." Try and avoid those features as well. You might get a very short response. "Can you tell me where you were yesterday?" Yes. That literal interpretation. Autistic people can take things very literally and not understand what the interviewer is actually getting to. It is by definition a spectrum condition, so everybody's different. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So please treat somebody as the individual that they are rather than based on somebody else. Don't treat them based on a Hollywood version that they may have seen, or somebody that they've seen on TV, or maybe even another autistic person that they've come across previously. A lot of autistic people can be quite sensitive and have heightened sensory awareness. So things which may not be noticeable to the neurotypical professional may be very noticeable to the autistic person that they're communicating with. Sound which may be creeping into the environment where the conversation is taking place. The lighting in the room. Smells, for example, as well. Try and avoid too much deodorant or aftershave or perfume, or even room fresheners. That can be something which can pose a potential issue to an autistic person, remembering of course that everybody's different. Some autistic people may be touch sensitive, so physical contact may not be the best thing to do, and also perhaps avoid enclosed spaces. It can infringe that person's focus when they're communicating with the professional. Routines and rituals are very much an important feature of autism. I'm aware of someone that embarks on watching every episode of Doctor Who. If you were to ask that person to come into the interview room at the same time that they would normally watch that TV programme, that could impact on their ability to focus and to be aware of what it is you're saying, because their mind could be elsewhere on the fact that they're missing that ritual. So if you are able to speak to family, to carers, parents, professionals that have already had some involvement with the individual concerned, and find out what makes that person tick from a communication perspective, what things help the communication and what things may have been used in the past that have not lent itself to that communication process being as effective as it could have been. Stimming is self-regulatory behaviour. It's comforting. It can also be a sign that the situation that they're experiencing is challenging and maybe there's too much going on, and the stimming is there to relieve that anxiety or the issues that they're facing at that moment in time. So it can be something like blinking or hand flapping or rocking, or it can involve something like a piece of string or maybe blue tack, something like that, which gives this tactile reassurance. Unless it's something that may cause the individual some harm, let it go, and it's just something that hopefully, if it's taking place, will help that person in the environment that they're currently in at that time. Meltdowns can be quite a harrowing sight to the uninitiated, and sometimes it can seem very distressing for the person involved. It's sometimes where there's too much going on. Maybe there's been something which has happened which has gone against the expectations of the person. There's been a break in routine, or there's just been too much sensory assault or change of plans from what was expected. So a number of things can trigger meltdowns. Once a meltdown has started, it really is a case of letting it go and just trying to make the environment as safe as possible for that person that's in meltdown to get through the process of meltdown. Typically, but not exclusively, the hands may come up around the head, and as I say, just try and make the environment safe, and perhaps if it's in a public place, just stop people observing or becoming fascinated. Just try and move people along and just try and make it as safe as possible for the individual that's in meltdown. Shutdown is perhaps more challenging to recognise for someone else other than the person that's in shutdown, because it's quite insular, whereas meltdown is an expressive way of showing the distress that somebody is in. A shutdown is more insular, and it's almost as if somebody's gone into a torpor. And again, it's the same type of thing. There's been too much happening, and that person has then delved deep into a torpor. So equally as challenging for the person that's in shutdown as it is for the person that's in meltdown. I've spent many years trying to speak to police officers and social workers to try and improve and just to try and make those reasonable adjustments. Autistic people can communicate, but more importantly, when they do communicate, they need to be listened to. It's not a challenging process at all. It's something that they just need to be aware of and to just try and tweak their own conversation styles.